Hello everyone, how are you doing? Hope you are doing great. I'm talking to you from Horizon Language School channel, and this is an English class, and this class is for grade 9, and the session is a story session for grade 9, and your story, as you know, is A Tale of Two Cities, written by Charles Dickens. But before we start today's chapter is chapter 9, La Force Prison. Um, let's try to remember some of the incidents in chapter 8, okay, under the title of A Call for Help, okay. Can anyone tell me the main theme of that chapter, A Call for Help? Do you remember? Okay. I think most of you remember that the meaning of the chapter title, A Call for Help, because Charles Darnley has been imprisoned when he went to France. So, yeah, this is a little hint for you because I'm going to ask you a question now and I hope you can answer me, okay? The question is, why did Charles Darnley make the decision to return to France? Do you remember? Okay, let me help you. Darnay made the decision to return after receiving a letter from his former servant begging for help. Darnay used to be a marquis and owned a considerable tract of land that was looked after by. He has a servant, and that servant has been imprisoned by the French revolutionaries after the revolution, and he has been imprisoned. So he sent a message to Charles Darnley to beg him to come and help him. So that was chapter 8 about. But today we are going to listen to the reader, your CD for chapter 9. But before we listen, I would like to ask you a question and keep that question in your mind because you are going to listen to the answer during you're following with me in your storybook with the reader. And after we finish, I'm going to ask you, did you know the answer or not? And the question is, who was the visitor Mr. Lorry had? Okay, in this chapter you will listen to the answer of this question. Mr. Lorry had a visitor, but do you have any idea who was that visitor? Let's see. Now let's listen to the reader. Now let's listen.
Chapter 9, La Force Prison. The French office of Tellson's Bank was in a large building near the centre of Paris. When Mr. Lorry reached there, he took rooms in the same building so as to be able to carry out his business more easily. One night, he was in his office in the bank, worrying about the city and considering how much danger Tellson's was in. Then the doorbell rang. It sent a wave of uneasiness through Mr. Lorry as the Manette family entered the room with Miss Pross. Mr. Lorry almost fainted at the sight of them. "What are you doing here?" cried Lorry in surprise. Lucy ran into his arms. "Charles is in Paris. He came secretly to save his old servant," replied Lucy. "In Paris? Is he mad? That's too dangerous," cried Mr. Lorry, whose eyes were gazing in astonishment. "It's too late, Mr. Lorry. He has been arrested and taken to La Force prison," said Lucy. "What is that noise outside?" asked Dr. Manette, who was heading to the window. "Don't look out," cried Lorry, trying but failing to prevent Dr. Manette from opening the curtains. Dr. Manette was shocked to see people gathered around an enormous grindstone in the square. They were shouting wildly, holding knives, swords, and axes which were covered with blood. They looked horrible with their sweaty faces and weapons. Their mad roar revealed how they had turned into savage, bloodthirsty animals. "Why are they doing this?" asked Dr. Manette. "They are the ones murdering the prisoners, accusing them of being enemies of the people," replied Mr. Lorry. "Charles is in real danger. I will go and talk to them," said Dr. Manette. "Dr. Manette, these men—" "My friend, I am safe in Paris. Everybody knows me here. I was a prisoner in the Bastille for 18 years. They all know how I suffered exactly like they did." Dr. Manette hurried out. He was in the courtyard when Mr. Lorry went back to the window. The doctor's white hair, his remarkable face, and the confidence of his manner carried him immediately into the middle of the crowd. For a moment, there was a pause in the deafening shouts of the mob. Then Mr. Lorry saw him surrounded by the crowd, shouting, "Long live the Bastille prisoner!" As a former prisoner, Dr. Manette had managed to influence the crowd, who all respected him and considered him as one of the patriots. As a result, they helped him to get to La Force prison to visit Darnay. The following morning, Mr. Lorry found a safe place for Lucy, little Lucy, and Miss Pross. He sent Jerry Cruncher with them as an escort to protect them. 2 days later, Mr. Lorry had a visitor. A harsh-looking man stood in front of him, staring at him. Mr. Lorry looked at him closely. "I have seen you somewhere. Perhaps you have seen me at my wine shop. My name is Defarge." Yes, have you come from Dr. Manette?" asked Mr. Lorry. "Yes, Dr. Manette gave me this note to deliver to you." Defarge handed him the note from Dr. Manette, which read, "Charles is safe, but I cannot leave this place yet. The man who brings this has a short note from Charles to Lucy. Let him see her." Mr. Lorry was delighted. "Will you come with me to where Lucy is staying?" he said to Defarge. "Of course," answered Defarge. Mr. Lorry hardly noticed that Defarge spoke coldly. They set off to the place where Lucy was staying. When they went out into the courtyard, a woman was sitting by the grindstone knitting. "Madame Defarge," cried Mr. Lorry, "is she coming with us?" "Yes," answered Defarge. "She wants to see Lucy, so that she will be able to recognize her. It is for her safety." Mr. Lorry looked doubtfully at Defarge, but he led them the way to where Lucy was staying. Defarge gave her a note from her husband. "My dear Lucy, be brave. I am well, and your father has influence here. You cannot answer this. Kiss our child for me." That was all the writing. Lucy was so happy that she couldn't hold back her tears. She turned to kiss Madame Defarge's hands gratefully. She felt really intimidated. Madame Defarge's hand felt cold and heavy. There was something in its touch that made Lucy pause and look at the woman in terror. Suddenly, little Lucy showed up, which made Madame Defarge gaze at her, and she stopped her knitting. She had a strange look on her face. "Is she his daughter?" "Yes, madame," Lucy replied, holding her daughter tight. "Please be good to my husband. I beg you as a wife and mother." "We have known many husbands and fathers put in prison for many years. What is one more among so many?" Madame Defarge said with a voice full of bitterness, and she left with her husband at once. "I'm afraid of this woman more than anything I have seen in Paris. I'm so worried about Charles," whispered Lucy anxiously. "Courage, my dear," said Mr. Lorry. "We are better off than many other poor souls. Be thankful." "I am not ungrateful, I hope," said Lucy. "But that terrible woman seems to throw a shadow on me and all my hopes." Although Mr. Lorry did his best to be cheerful, he was also secretly deeply troubled. The doctor stayed in La Force prison for several days in order to keep an eye on Darnay. He did not tell Lucy that during that time, 1,100 defenseless men and women, prisoners of all ages, had been killed by the people. She only knew that there had been an attack on the prisons and that some of the prisoners had been murdered. But he told Mr. Lorry, under a promise of secrecy, what had happened.
Okay, now time for some questions. Remember the question I have asked you at the start of the lesson? Um, it's number 5 in those questions. Who was the visitor Mr. Lorry had and why he or she visited him? Okay, so I think now you know who visited Mr. Lorry. Okay, Mr. Lorry had a visit from. Do you know? Okay, Mr. Lorry had a visit from Mr. Defarge. Okay, but let's start from number one, question number one, to answer them in a range. Okay. Okay, now let's start with question number one. Why did the Manette family with Miss Pross visit Mr. Lorry at night in his office? And I wrote the answers for all the questions to save time. So the answer is gonna be to tell him that Charles is in danger and he had been arrested while he was trying to help his servant. Number two, where did Charles imprisoned? In the La Force prison. This is the title of the chapter. Number three, who went to save Charles? Dr. Manette, who went to save Charles, and I think you remember why, because he had been imprisoned in, as you know, Dr. Manetti had been imprisoned in Paris for 18 years, so he is familiar with the people there, and he's gonna be safe, so he went to save Charles. And let's go to number four. How many years was Dr. Manette a prisoner in the Bastille? 18 years, as I told you before. Number five. Who was the visitor Mr. Lorry had? This is the question I have asked you at the start of the session. And why he or she visited him. Mr. Defarge, he visited Mr. Lorry. And we will know in the next question why he visited him. As we heard the speaker in that chapter, chapter 9, Mr. Defarge, he visited Mr. Lorry to give him a note from Dr. Manette. And now let's talk about question 6. What was written in the note which the visitor delivered to Mr. Lorry? Dr. Manette sent a note to Mr. Lorry including that Charles is safe but he can't leave the place yet, and he asked him to let the visitors see his daughter Lucy. Um, that's it for this session, and thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed chapter 9, and for the next session, thank you so much.